They said it was just one night, a moment that should have stayed hidden between a powerful CEO and the woman who never meant to catch his eye. But what happens when one mistake refuses to fade, when the line between compassion and control begins to blur, and when the man who has everything finds himself undone by the one woman he was never meant to love? In a world of glass towers and whispered rumors, Emily Carter, a quiet, self-made secretary, learns that ambition can cost more than she ever imagined. And Jonathan Hale, the man behind the empire, discovers that love can strip power bare, leaving only the truth of who we really are when no one's watching. Was it love or redemption, guilt or grace? And what if the night they both tried to forget was the night that changed them forever? Stay with us as we uncover their story of pride, forgiveness, and second chances that only time can reveal. If this journey speaks to your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, where every story reminds us that even broken hearts can still shine. Snow drifted in lazy spirals outside the tall windows of the Fairmont Tower Hotel, soft flakes dissolving against the golden light that spilled from the grand ballroom. Inside, Boston's winter felt a world away. Crystal chandeliers shimmered like frozen constellations above a sea of tuxedos and sequined gowns. The air carried a polite hum, a mingling of laughter, violin strings, and the faint scent of expensive perfume. Emily Carter stood near the entrance, one gloved hand clutching a small black purse that had cost her 2 weeks' savings. Her emerald dress, modest and well-tailored, had been altered by her own careful stitching. She had spent the afternoon pressing its seams in the tiny kitchen of her apartment, praying the satin would catch the light just enough to look intentional rather than inexpensive. "You belong here," she reminded herself. Though her pulse argued otherwise, around her, conversations rose and fell like measured tides. The city's elite bankers, investors, and politicians moved in practiced circles. Waiters in white jackets glided past with silver trays of champagne. Somewhere in the distance, a string quartet eased into a waltz that Emily half recognized from an old movie. She took a slow breath. After 6 years at Hale Tech Industries, tonight was her first invitation to the company's annual charity gala. Secretaries didn't usually make the list, but she had earned her spot through quiet persistence, late nights balancing schedules, catching mistakes before executives saw them, holding an empire together from the shadows. Her supervisor had smiled thinly that morning. "You've worked hard, Emily. Try not to look like you're counting the cost of the caviar. Now, under the glare of chandeliers." She understood the warning. Everything here gleamed and everyone seemed to know exactly how to gleam with it. She drifted toward the refreshment table, accepting a flute of champagne she had no intention of drinking. The bubbles trembled at the rim each time someone brushed past. Beyond the crowd, a pianist's melody curved through the air, delicate and distant. Emily's gaze wandered upward, the high ceiling painted with scenes of angels and harvests. The way the light reflected off glass and gold, it was all so different from her life in Portland, Maine, where winter smelled of salt and fish oil, and the only ballroom she had known was her father's workshop floor at closing time. He had died when she was 21, leaving her with a worn pickup truck, a box of bills, and the determination to never drown in anyone else's debt again. That determination had carried her through community college, through the move to Boston, through years of living on instant oatmeal and secondhand coats. Still standing, she thought, lifting her chin, still here. Her reflection in the mirror behind the bar almost surprised her. The woman staring back was composed, not the girl who used to wash dishes at the diner off Route 1. She even smiled a little, testing how confidence might feel if she let it live on her face. Emily Carter, a familiar voice interrupted. Grace Linton, from the accounting department, appeared beside her holding a glass of white wine. "You clean up beautifully. Didn't expect to see you here." Emily laughed softly. "Neither did I. Maybe they ran out of people with titles." Grace's grin turned sympathetic. "Enjoy it while it lasts. You'll be back in the office Monday, wondering if any of this was real." "I already am," Emily said, glancing around. Look at them. They talk like they own gravity. Grace leaned closer. Speaking of, have you seen him yet? Him. Grace nodded toward the far end of the ballroom. Jonathan Hale. In the flesh. Emily followed her gaze and felt her heartbeat stutter. Across the glittering expanse stood the man whose signature adorned nearly every memo she'd ever typed. Jonathan Hale, CEO. 40 stories of glass and ambition carried his name. He was taller than she'd imagined, his presence cutting effortlessly through the room's noise. The dark fabric of his tuxedo, framed shoulders built from years of discipline, his hair, chestnut under the chandelier light, held just enough disarray to seem human. Yet there was something in his stillness, a kind of self-containment that made others hesitate before approaching. Even at this distance, she sensed it, that quiet authority, the weight of someone used to being watched but rarely seen. Rumor said he'd taken the company public at 35, turned inherited metal plants into a tech empire, and broken more mergers and hearts than anyone could count. But what struck Emily most wasn't his reputation. It was the loneliness hiding behind his composed expression, the way he seemed detached from the laughter surrounding him, as if the entire gala were another meeting he couldn't decline. Careful, Grace whispered. Staring at the boss like that could get you noticed. Emily looked away, flushing. I'm not staring. Sure you're not. Grace smirked. I'll leave you to your not staring. With a wink, she disappeared into the crowd. Left alone, Emily tried to focus on the band, on the sweep of the music, on anything that would steady her nerves, but her eyes betrayed her, drawn back across the ballroom. Jonathan was speaking with 2 board members, nodding occasionally, his gaze distant. When he laughed, a rare, brief curve of his mouth, it seemed to startle even him. She wondered what kind of man forgot how to laugh. Someone brushed her elbow, jolting the champagne glass. A single drop of golden liquid spilled onto her wrist, cold against her skin. She dabbed it quickly with a napkin, but the tiny accident grounded her, reminded her that she was real, human, out of her depth, but alive within it. She decided she would stay just long enough to prove to herself that she could. 1 hour, maybe 2. Then she'd slip out into the night, take the train back to her quiet apartment, and hang this emerald dress in the closet like a small victory. From the corner of her eye, movement caught her attention again. Jonathan Hale was turning his head, scanning the crowd with the detached focus of someone checking for exits or escape. For an instant, his eyes met hers. The world around them seemed to hush. The music continued, but muted. The lights softened, the chatter faded. He didn't smile, neither did she. But something unspoken passed between them, a flicker of recognition. The startled awareness of 2 people who hadn't expected to see themselves reflected in a stranger. Emily looked down first, her pulse quickening. When she glanced up again, he had already turned away, surrounded once more by conversation and glitter. Still, she felt the echo of that glance settle in her chest like a secret note meant only for her. Outside, snow kept falling over the city, soft, relentless, indifferent, while inside the Fairmont Tower. The story that would change both their lives had quietly begun. The orchestra had shifted to a livelier rhythm now, violins chasing one another through the air while guests swayed in practiced elegance. Emily lingered near the edge of the ballroom, relieved that no one expected her to dance. She was watching the swirl of satin and polished shoes when a passing waiter stopped beside her, offering another glass of red wine. She hesitated. 1 more can't hurt, she told herself, though she had barely finished the first. The music, the lights, the shimmer of the crowd, it all felt dreamlike, distant. She wanted to feel, just for a moment, that she belonged among them. Balancing the glass carefully, she turned toward the art display, arranged near the windows portraits of Hail-Tech's philanthropic work children in hospitals, schools with new computers, smiling faces framed by the company's logo. She allowed herself a small, proud sigh. At least the work we do matters. Someone brushed past her shoulder. The motion startled her. Her heel caught on the edge of the carpet. And the next moment, stretched in slow motion, the tilt of the glass. The gleam of red liquid arcing through the air until it collided squarely with a man's tuxedo. The gasp escaped her before she even looked up. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry." Dark crimson stained the front of his jacket like a signature. The man turned slowly, startled but composed. When their eyes met, Emily's stomach dropped. Jonathan Hale, the CEO, of all the people in Boston. She froze, napkin trembling in her hand. "Mr. Hale, I can fix this." He looked down at the spreading stain, then back at her. She braced for the cold reprimand, the dismissive glare that powerful men wore like armor. But instead, his expression softened. Not pity, not irritation, just quiet surprise. "It's all right," he said finally, voice calm and low. "It's only fabric, and I own more suits than I'll ever wear." Emily blinked, caught off guard. "Still, please, let me." She dabbed helplessly at the lapel, only smearing the red further. "Oh no, I'm making it worse." "That seems accurate," he said, and to her astonishment, a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. She exhaled an embarrassed laugh. "Great. My first real conversation with the CEO, and I've turned you into a crime scene." He chuckled, a deep sound that seemed to surprise him as much as her. "It's been a dull evening. You may have saved me from it." For a moment, they simply stood there, the crowd moving around them, a current of laughter and music, while the two of them existed in a still pocket of awkward humanity. Emily's pulse raced. She could feel the heat rising to her cheeks, and she wished the marble floor would open up and swallow her whole. "Please, let me pay for the cleaning bill, or I can replace the jacket." Jonathan shook his head. "Trust me, Ms. Carter, you'd be better off buying a car." She blinked. "You know my name. I try to know everyone's name," he said lightly, though his gaze lingered on her with unusual focus. "Executive Secretary." "Correct. You manage Hailtech's client correspondence." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Yes, for 3 years. I've read some of your reports," he added. Sharp mind, concise writing. That startled her even more than the accident. You read those." "I read everything that has substance," he said. "You'd be surprised how rare that is." For the first time, she noticed the faint weariness in his eyes, the kind that came from too many rooms like this one, too many conversations that meant nothing. Up close, his perfection seemed less intimidating. There were tiny lines near his temples, a faint scar along his jaw, human traces, quietly resisting the polish. "I really am sorry," she said again, softer now. He tilted his head, studying her as though weighing something invisible. "You apologize a great deal. Does it help?" She blinked. I suppose it makes me feel polite." "Polite," he repeated, almost to himself. That's the word people use when they mean safe. The remark lingered between them. Emily wasn't sure if he was teasing or confiding, but it felt strangely personal. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. A waiter appeared discreetly, offering a cloth. Jonathan waved him off. "It's fine, thank you." Emily stepped back, mortified. "I should probably disappear before I cause a second disaster." He looked down at the damp lapel, then back at her. "You're not the disaster, Ms. Carter. Just an unexpected variable." That earned a genuine laugh from her, light and nervous. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It was meant as one," he said, and she thought she saw the faintest glimmer of amusement in his steel-gray eyes. They stood in silence for a heartbeat too long. Somewhere. The music shifted again, slower, softer. Violins melting into piano. Jonathan seemed to notice her discomfort and adjusted his cufflink, breaking the spell. "Perhaps," he said, his tone suddenly formal again. "You owe me a conversation instead of an apology." Emily blinked. A conversation. He nodded toward the far side of the ballroom, where the noise was quieter. "About your work, your ideas, something that doesn't involve dry cleaning. Her instinct screamed that it was improper, that gossip would bloom the second anyone saw them talking alone. Yet beneath the fear was a pull she couldn't quite name, the curiosity of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in a place that preferred her invisible. She hesitated, torn between reason and the quickening of her heart. Just a conversation. His lips curved slightly. Just a conversation. Emily glanced down at the red stain on his tuxedo, then back at his steady gaze. There was no arrogance in it, no pretense, only a quiet invitation she didn't yet understand. "All right," she said finally, "but only because I can't let you walk around like a piece of modern art." Jonathan's laugh was low, genuine, fair enough. He gestured toward a quieter corner near the terrace doors. As they began to move through the crowd, Emily caught her reflection once more in the mirrored wall, the modest secretary beside the man who owned half the skyline. The image felt unreal, a scene from someone else's life. Still, she followed. Outside, the snow continued to fall, brushing the windows with delicate frost. The night carried on, unaware that its story had just taken its first impossible turn. The train rattled beneath the frozen streets of Boston, carrying the city's leftovers home, waitresses, nurses, office assistants clutching their coats tighter against the cold. Emily sat by the window, her reflection faint against the dark glass, haloed by the blur of passing lights. She'd slipped out of the gala shortly after midnight, the echo of Jonathan Hale's voice still warm in her memory. "Perhaps you owe me a conversation instead of an apology." The words had followed her all the way down the marble stairs, out through the revolving doors, into the waiting night. Now. As the train screeched to a stop near Dorchester, she replayed the moment for what felt like the 100th time. It wasn't flirtation, she told herself. It was curiosity a man used to control, momentarily intrigued by someone beneath his notice. She didn't belong in his orbit. She'd only gotten too close for a second, like a moth to the wrong flame. Her stop arrived. The cold slapped her cheeks as she climbed the stairs to street level. Snow had turned to sleet, stinging against her face. The walk to her apartment building was short, but bitter. Each step a reminder that reality lived far from chandeliers and champagne. The building's hallway smelled faintly of fried onions and radiator heat. She unlocked the door to find the living room dim, except for the glow of the old TV. "Hey, Dad," she said softly. Her father, once a fisherman from the Maine coast, sat half reclined in his worn recliner. The oxygen tube rested beneath his nose, the soft hiss of the machine filling the silence. He turned his head slightly, eyes clouded but warm. "You're home late. Company thing," she replied, peeling off her gloves. "Fancy dinner for the people who run the world." He smiled faintly. "Did you run it?" "Not quite." She hung her coat, poured him a glass of water, checked the pill bottles lying neatly on the counter. The rent was paid barely. The electric bill waited unopened on the table, and somewhere in her inbox sat another hospital statement marked urgent. "Did you have fun?" her father asked, watching her quietly. Emily paused. "It was beautiful," she said finally, "and a little lonely." He nodded, as if he understood perfectly. Beautiful things often are. She leaned down, kissed his forehead, and tried to smile. "Get some rest." "Okay." When she finally slipped into her own small bedroom, she caught her reflection again, this time in the mirror of her dresser. The same woman who had stood beneath chandeliers now stood in a room that smelled of cold and detergent. Yet something in her eyes looked different. Maybe it was that she'd been seen. Not for her mistakes, but for something real beneath them. Jonathan across town, 40 floors above the sleeping city. Jonathan Hale stepped out of his shoes and into silence. His penthouse overlooked the harbor, floor-to-ceiling glass walls revealing a skyline scattered with light. Beyond the glass, the Atlantic was a black mirror stretching to infinity. He loosened his tie and poured a measure of scotch into a crystal tumbler. The sound of the liquid meeting glass was sharp, clean, almost too loud. This was his world stillness, precision, control, and yet tonight it felt hollow. He crossed the living room, passing the framed photographs of Hale Tech's milestones, ribbon cuttings, award ceremonies, his father's proud handshake at the IPO announcement. His father had been gone 3 years now, but the man's voice still lingered like an echo in every decision Jonathan made. Never show weakness. Never explain. Success is its own apology. He sank into the leather couch, staring through the glass walls at the lights of Boston below. Success, he thought, was supposed to feel like freedom. Instead, it had built him a cage. He thought of the woman at the gala, the shock in her eyes when the wine spilled, the trembling sincerity in her voice. No pretense, no performance, just honest embarrassment. Most people wanted something from him, a promotion, an investment, a piece of his name. But Emily Carter had looked at him like he was just another man with a ruined jacket. He found himself smiling rare and unguarded. Then, just as quickly, he frowned. Why was he thinking about her at all? He had dinner invitations from investors unanswered, projects waiting for approval, quarterly reports to review. His assistant had left a reminder on his phone calendar, call Senator Whitfield, 9 a.m., yet all he could hear was her voice. I'll take that as a compliment, she'd said, laughing nervously. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair and set the glass down untouched. The city outside the windows glittered with the illusion of movement. But the room itself felt frozen like one of those museum exhibits of a perfect life no one was allowed to touch. He had spent a decade perfecting the art of distance meetings without warmth, conversations without risk. The glass walls of his penthouse were only an extension of the ones he carried inside, transparent enough for the world to see success, opaque enough to keep anyone from entering it. But tonight, that glass had a crack. He glanced toward his reflection, the lonely man in the suit, haloed by city light. The faint stain of red still marked the edge of his lapel. He hadn't sent it to the cleaners yet. Why not? He didn't have an answer. Jonathan picked up his phone, scrolling without purpose through the day's messages. A brief update from the board, an invitation to an art fundraiser, a reminder from his personal trainer. He ignored them all. Finally, he stopped on the company directory app. His thumb hovered over the name Emily Carter, Executive Secretary. Client Relations? He didn't press it, he just stared, then turned off the screen. Some part of him, the disciplined, rational part, warned against this kind of distraction. But another part, smaller yet insistent, whispered that something about her felt necessary, not romantic, not yet, just real. He rose and crossed back to the window, scotch still untouched, the city still burning beneath him. His reflection merged with the skyline, two lonely things made of glass and light. When he finally went to bed, sleep did not come easily. Each time he closed his eyes, he heard her voice again, soft but certain, like a thread pulling through silence. I'll take that as a compliment. He replayed it once, then again, wondering why it lingered and what it meant that it did. The gala was thinning out by the time Emily returned from the powder room. Waiters cleared empty glasses. The orchestra played its final waltz in a softer, slower rhythm meant to guide guests toward the door. She'd planned to leave quietly, slip away before anyone remembered her name or her clumsiness. But when she stepped back into the ballroom, Jonathan Hale was still there. He stood near the terrace doors, speaking with one of the board members. The ruined tuxedo had been replaced by a black dinner jacket borrowed, perhaps from the hotel staff. The stain was gone, but Emily's mortification remained. She considered turning around, pretending she hadn't seen him, but his gaze found her before she could move. He excused himself from the conversation and crossed the room. "Ms. Carter," he greeted, his tone even unreadable. "I thought you might have escaped already." "I was trying to," she admitted, then winced. "That sounded rude. I just meant—" He smiled faintly. "It's refreshing. Most people try too hard to stay." Emily hesitated, unsure whether to laugh or apologize. The faint hum of music filled the pause between them. "About that conversation you owe me," Jonathan said. I'd still like to have it. Now, she asked, glancing around. The last of the guests were drifting toward the coat check. He nodded. There's a quiet lounge upstairs. Less noise, fewer cameras. Every sensible thought told her to decline. She was a secretary. He was the CEO. Even a friendly chat could ignite rumors. But curiosity dangerous. Persistent curiosity softened her resolve. All right, she said quietly. Just for a few minutes. Jonathan gestured toward the elevator. Just a few. The ride to the top floor was silent except for the soft chime of passing numbers. Emily kept her eyes on the carpet, aware of the faint scent of his cologne, something clean, understated, like cedar and rain. When the doors opened, he led her down a short corridor to a suite with a panoramic view of the city. Inside, the room was dimly lit, all glass and muted gold. Beyond the windows, snow fell over Boston like sifted light, blurring the outlines of rooftops and harbor cranes. Jonathan shrugged out of his jacket, loosened his tie, and for the first time that evening, looked human. Can I get you something, he asked. Tea wine. Or would that risk another wardrobe incident? She smiled despite herself. Maybe just water. He poured 2 glasses from a crystal pitcher, handed her one, then leaned against the edge of the desk near the window. You work with the client reports, correct? The North Atlantic expansion. Emily nodded, mostly logistics and correspondence. Nothing you'd find interesting. Try me. She hesitated, surprised. No one ever asked her opinions about projects. She was the bridge between people who mattered. Yet something in his voice genuine, attentive, invited honesty. Well, she began slowly. The marketing team wants to push into emerging green tech markets in Canada. They're focusing on luxury branding, but I think that's short-sighted. People there value sustainability more than prestige. If we marketed accessibility instead of status, we could gain real loyalty. Jonathan's gaze sharpened. Accessibility over status. He repeated, That's not a phrase I hear often. I know, she said quickly. I probably sound naive. On the contrary, he said, setting down his glass. You sound like someone who still believes business can do good. The comment caught her off guard. Don't you? He paused. Outside, the snow thickened, soft against the glass. I used to. The room fell quiet except for the hum of the city below. Emily studied him, how his shoulders seemed heavier without the armor of formality. How his eyes held something almost wistful. What changed, she asked gently. Jonathan looked out the window. My father. He built Hailtech from steel and sweat, then handed me a kingdom and said, Don't let it rust. I was 28. He believed in control, not compassion. I spent years trying to be the man he wanted, and somewhere along the way, I stopped knowing what I wanted. Emily's chest tightened. That sounds lonely. He turned to her. It is. She hadn't meant to say it aloud, but her voice betrayed her empathy. I think I understand. My dad used to say life's like a fishing line you pull too tight. It snaps. You let it loose. It drifts away. Jonathan smiled faintly. Wise man? He is, she said softly. Though he's not doing well these days. It's why I stayed in Boston instead of moving up. He needs me. I suppose I'm tied to him the way you were tied to your father. He nodded slowly. Different ropes, same knots. Their eyes met again longer this time. The air felt warmer somehow, though the thermostat hadn't moved. Outside, snow pressed gently against the glass, softening the city lights into a hazy glow. I'm sorry, Emily said after a moment. This isn't what you meant by a business discussion. Jonathan's voice lowered. It's exactly what I meant. He took a step closer, stopping when he saw her inhale. You don't have to be afraid. Emily, I'm not, she said quickly, though her pulse betrayed her. Yes, you are, he said, not unkindly, and maybe I am too. The truth of it hung between them, fragile as the snowflakes beyond the glass. She could feel the weight of her own hesitation, the years of caution, of doing everything right, of staying invisible to survive. Yet here was a man who had everything and still looked as if he were searching for the one thing he'd never bought: connection. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was light, almost reverent. Her breath caught. "This is a mistake," she whispered. "Probably," he said, "but it doesn't feel like one." His voice was soft, steady, the kind that asked without demanding. For a long moment, they stood in that quiet, the city fading into nothing but light and snow. And then, as naturally as a sigh, their lips met. It wasn't a hungry kiss, or even a deliberate one. It was the kind of kiss that happens when two silences collide. For one suspended heartbeat, the world seemed to stop spinning. When it ended, Emily stepped back, trembling. "We can't." Jonathan's eyes searched hers. "I know." Yet neither moved. Outside, snow blanketed the harbor. Inside, the room glowed with the faint golden ache of something inevitable. Later, when she finally left the suite, coat clutched, cheeks flushed, the city's cold air bit at her skin. She walked fast, almost running, as if distance could undo what had already been written. Behind her, the lights of the Fairmont Tower shimmered through the snowfall. It would be a night they would both try and fail to forget. The first light of dawn crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the snow outside into a pale shimmer. Boston was quiet at that hour, only the hum of traffic far below, and the occasional gust of wind brushing against the glass. Emily Carter stirred beneath the weight of a heavy blanket. For a moment, before memory returned, she thought she was in her own apartment. The sheets were too soft, though, the scent too unfamiliar: cedar, expensive soap, and something faintly masculine. Then she saw the tuxedo jacket folded over the chair, the cufflinks glinting on the nightstand. Her breath caught. Jonathan Hale was still asleep beside her. He lay on his side, one arm resting across the pillow, his hair disheveled, his face unguarded in a way she had never seen before. Without the precision of his usual composure, he looked almost boyish, human, vulnerable. For a few seconds she simply watched, her heart an uneven rhythm in her chest. Then the flood of realization hit the night. The snow, the kiss, the way it hadn't stopped there. Her pulse began to pound. What have I done? She sat up slowly, gathering the sheet around her as if it could shield her from the truth. The clock on the bedside table read 6:07. Outside, the city was waking. Inside, her life as she knew it felt suspended between before and after. Emily pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. She had spent years building boundaries, earning her reputation, keeping her name free of gossip. In a single night, she had crossed every line she'd promised never to approach. She could still feel the warmth of his hands, the steady rhythm of his voice when he'd told her about his father, the way he'd looked at her not as an employee and not as a subordinate, but as if she were someone who could see him clearly. It had felt right in the moment. Now it felt impossible. She slipped out of bed carefully, her bare feet silent against the carpet. Her dress hung from a chair, wrinkled and glittering faintly in the morning light. As she reached for it, her reflection appeared in the mirror across the room, a woman with tousled hair, flushed cheeks, and eyes that no longer looked sure of anything. The shame came first, then guilt, and beneath both, something more dangerous: longing. She wanted to remember the way he had whispered her name, how his touch had carried both restraint and surrender. But she also wanted to forget it all, to erase the part of her that had said yes when she should have walked away. Emily dressed quietly, each movement deliberate. She found her shoes near the window, her purse on the coffee table. The zipper sounded unnaturally loud in the stillness. Behind her, Jonathan shifted in his sleep. His hand reached out blindly, as if searching for her in the half-dream. His fingers brushed the sheet where she had been. The simple gesture broke her heart. She froze, watching him. The sunlight fell across his face, catching the faint scar along his jaw. In sleep. He looked peaceful, maybe even happy. It struck her that she would probably never see him like this again, unguarded, unaware of the walls he built every morning before stepping into the world. "Jonathan," she whispered, though she didn't intend to. He murmured something she couldn't hear, still half lost in sleep, and his hand closed gently around the edge of the blanket. That was her undoing. If she stayed 1 minute longer, she knew she would crawl back beside him, would let his warmth rewrite her resolve. And then there would be no way back to the life she had fought for: the modest apartment, the steady paycheck, the quiet pride of independence. She pulled her coat from the armchair, slipping it on over her dress. Her throat burned. Every sound seemed magnified: the faint tick of the clock, the rustle of fabric, the whisper of her own breathing. As she reached for the door, her reflection in the hallway mirror caught her again, smaller now, framed by luxury that did not belong to her. "You can't stay here," she told herself. "You can't be the story people whisper about in elevators." Her fingers tightened on the door handle. Behind her, Jonathan stirred once more. His voice, still thick with sleep, broke the silence. "Emily." She froze. For a heartbeat, she considered answering. She imagined turning back, telling him that last night had changed something real between them, that maybe they could find a way to navigate the consequences together. But fear spoke louder, fear of gossip, of judgment, of losing everything she had built. She swallowed hard and forced her voice into a whisper. "Go back to sleep." He didn't respond. The soft rhythm of his breathing returned. Emily opened the door. The hallway light spilled in, pale and cold. She stepped through and closed it gently behind her. The corridor smelled faintly of lemon polish and coffee brewing somewhere down the hall. A maid pushed a cart past her, offering a polite smile. Emily nodded, trying to seem like any other hotel guest on an early checkout. The elevator ride down felt endless. She could see her reflection again in the mirrored walls, flushed cheeks, tangled hair, eyes rimmed red. It was the face of someone who'd been reckless with her own rules. When the doors opened onto the lobby, morning light was already filtering through the revolving doors. The same chandelier that had glittered above last night's celebration now looked pale and cold, its magic drained by daylight. Emily walked quickly through the lobby, keeping her head down. A few early guests lingered near the reception desk, none of them noticing the woman slipping past with a heart too heavy for her small frame. Outside, the cold slapped her awake. Snow crunched beneath her heels as she crossed the street toward the taxi stand. The city smelled of coffee and exhaust, familiar and grounding. She drew her coat tighter and whispered to the wind, as if confessing to herself. It never happened. The cab driver didn't look twice at her as she climbed in. "Where to Dorchester?" she said, her voice steady now. "And please no shortcuts." The car pulled away from the hotel. In the rearview mirror, Emily caught one last glimpse of the Fairmont Tower fading into the brightening sky. Somewhere inside, Jonathan Hale was probably still asleep, hand reaching for someone who was already gone. The city stretched ahead, cold, ordinary, mercifully real. And though her heart ached with every passing block, she kept her gaze fixed forward, repeating the lies she needed to believe. It never happened. Monday morning came sharp and colorless, the kind of winter morning that made even sunlight feel cold. Emily arrived at Hale Tech earlier than usual, her nerves taut beneath the surface calm of routine. She clutched a coffee cup as she passed through the glass doors of the building, greeting the security guard with a polite nod. The lobby's marble floor reflected a city still half asleep. She saw her own reflection there, neat, composed, ordinary, and prayed that no one could read the turmoil beneath her pressed blazer. The elevator hummed softly as it carried her to the 28th floor. She rehearsed her day in her head, checked the morning reports, confirmed Jonathan's schedule with his assistant, respond to 3 client emails. Nothing unusual, nothing incriminating. Her desk was near the wide windows overlooking downtown Boston. The city glistened under a crust of frost, every rooftop gleaming like a mirror. Emily set her bag down, booted her computer, and focused on breathing evenly. It had been 2 days since that night, 2 days since she slipped out of the hotel room, leaving behind a man who didn't know how deeply he'd already unsettled her. Since then, she had heard nothing. No call, no message. She told herself that was good, clean, the way it should be. She was halfway through typing an email when the phone on her desk rang. Emily Carter. She answered, voice steady. Ms. Carter. "This is Patricia Langley," came the crisp reply. "Jonathan Hale's executive assistant." Patricia's tone was clipped and professional, the kind of voice that could silence an entire boardroom. "Mr. Hale would like to see you in his office. Immediately." Emily's fingers froze above the keyboard. "Of course," she managed. "I'll be right there." The line went dead. For a moment she sat perfectly still, the hum of the fluorescent lights loud in her ears. She looked down at her reflection in the black screen of her monitor, pale, wide-eyed, cornered. Then she straightened her posture, smoothed her skirt, and walked toward the CEO's suite. The hallway leading to Jonathan's office felt impossibly long, the kind that made each step echo like a question. She could see Patricia's desk ahead, the older woman's gray hair pulled into a tight bun, her expression unreadable. "He's expecting you," Patricia said simply, not meeting her eyes. Emily nodded and pushed open the heavy glass door. Jonathan's office was a cathedral of light panoramic windows overlooking the frozen harbor, sunlight glancing off polished surfaces. He stood with his back to her, hands in his pockets, staring out at the skyline. For a moment, she thought he hadn't heard her enter. Then he spoke. "Close the door, please." The soft click of the latch sounded final. Emily clasped her hands together, steadying her voice. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Hale." He turned slowly. His expression was unreadable calm, but not indifferent. The faintest trace of fatigue shadowed his eyes. "Emily," he said, and the sound of her first name from his mouth made her pulse skip. "We should talk about Friday night." Her breath caught. "There's nothing to talk about, sir." He arched a brow. "No, it was a mistake," she said quickly. "We were both caught up in the moment. It won't happen again." Jonathan studied her for a long moment, the silence between them stretching thin. "A mistake," he repeated softly, as if testing the word. "Yes," she said, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "A lapse in judgment. I take full responsibility, and I assure you it won't affect my work." Something flickered across his face. Disappointment, maybe, or disbelief. "You think that's what this was?" A lapse. Emily's voice trembled despite her effort. "I think that's the only way to move forward." Jonathan walked around the desk, closing the distance between them. The morning light caught in his hair, in the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. "You're frightened," he said quietly. She stepped back. "Of course I am. People talk, Mr. Hale, and if they talk about this, about us, there is no us." He finished for her, his tone gentle but firm. "That's what you're trying to say." She nodded once. He leaned against the edge of his desk, folding his arms. "I've been in this business long enough to know when something is real and when it isn't. What happened between us wasn't just convenience." Emily's throat tightened. "You don't get to decide that." "I'm not deciding anything," he said evenly. "I'm telling you what I felt." Her eyes burned, though she refused to let tears fall. Feelings don't change consequences. They don't rewrite company policy or erase what people will think. "Do you always live by what people think?" The question hit harder than he intended. She flinched, then steadied herself. "I live by what I can survive," she said. Jonathan exhaled slowly. "You're angry. I'm realistic," she said. "You're the CEO. I'm your secretary. You can forget what happened. I can't afford to." He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head slightly. "You underestimate me, Emily. You assume I'm looking for another forgettable night? I'm not." Her chest tightened. "Then what are you looking for?" He hesitated. The truth hovered between them, fragile and dangerous. "Something honest," he said finally. "And I think you are." The words undid her resolve more than any touch could have. For a heartbeat. She wanted to believe him to believe that something honest could exist in a world of contracts and whispers. But belief was a luxury she couldn't afford. "I should go," she said, turning toward the door. "There's work waiting." Jonathan's voice stopped her halfway there. "If you really think it was a mistake, I won't mention it again." She didn't turn around. "Good. But if I'm right," he added softly, "then time will prove it." Her hand froze on the door handle. "Then we'll let time decide who's right," he said. The words followed her out of the office, past Patricia's curious glance, down the long corridor lined with glass and light. At her desk, Emily sat down without taking off her coat. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened her inbox and forced herself back into the rhythm of work, typing, filing, breathing. Outside, the morning sun rose higher, turning the glass towers into blinding reflections. She caught her own faint image in the window, a woman composed, efficient, invisible. But somewhere behind that reflection, his words still lingered, impossible to ignore. "Then we'll let time decide who's right." The apartment smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old carpet, a scent that clung no matter how many candles Emily lit. The building leaned with age, its paint cracked along the window frames, the radiator hissing like a restless ghost. South Boston mornings always felt too small for her thoughts. She stood at the counter stirring sugar into a chipped mug, watching the milk swirl into pale clouds. Her phone buzzed on the table, another reminder from the utility company. The third one that week. She turned it face down. From the living room came the uneven strumming of a guitar, a lazy rhythm chasing a tune that never quite resolved. Ethan was awake. Her half-brother's voice floated through the door. "You're up early again. Some of us have jobs," Emily said, keeping her tone gentle. He laughed not cruelly, but carelessly, "And some of us are waiting for inspiration." She smiled faintly despite herself. Ethan was 22 and still believed talent could outrun responsibility. He had her father's eyes and none of his discipline. "Coffee's ready," she called. "If you can handle real-world caffeine." Ethan emerged, guitar still slung across his chest, hair a mess of golden curls. "No thanks. I'm detoxing from caffeine. Bad for creativity." "Bad for paying bills," she said. He grinned. "That's your superpower, not mine." Before she could answer, the bedroom door opened, and Margaret Carter appeared silk robe, cigarette already lit, eyes sharp despite the morning haze. Her stepmother still carried traces of the beauty that had once drawn Emily's father in high cheekbones. Flawless posture, but life had sharpened her softness into angles. "Do you two ever stop talking?" she muttered, waving smoke from her face. "I swear, I can't even think before my first cigarette." Emily turned, suppressing a sigh. "Good morning to you too." Margaret ignored the jab and sat down at the kitchen table, pulling a stack of papers from a drawer, bills, envelopes, letters stamped in red. "We need to talk." Emily froze. The phrase "we need to talk" had never once meant anything good in this house. Margaret spread the envelopes like a dealer laying down losing cards. "Mortgage is 3 months behind." The bank called again. "They're threatening foreclosure." Ethan stopped strumming. "Wait, what you said you had that handled?" "I did," Margaret snapped, "until your little side project with that music gear wiped out my savings." Ethan's mouth fell open. "You told me I told you to make something of yourself. I didn't tell you to spend my credit cards doing it." Emily stepped in before the familiar spiral began. "How much?" she asked quietly. Margaret exhaled smoke, eyes narrowing. 15,000 to catch up. Another 10 to stay current. Emily's heart sank. Her salary barely covered rent and medical supplies for her father's care facility. That's impossible. "Not for someone working at Hale Tech," Margaret said, her tone sharpening. "You work for a man who probably spends that much on cufflinks. That has nothing to do with me." "Doesn't it?" Margaret leaned back, the cigarette glowing between her fingers. "You've been there how long? 3-4 years. Still a secretary. Still struggling. Either you're not as smart as you think, or you're not using what you've got." Emily set down her coffee before she could spill it. What exactly are you implying? Don't play innocent, Margaret said smoothly. You work close to power, men like your boss. They notice pretty women who stay late. You'd be surprised what doors open when you stop pretending not to see them. Ethan winced. Mom? No, Emily said, cutting him off. Let her finish. Margaret smiled thinly. I'm just saying, opportunity doesn't always knock politely. Sometimes it waits for you to have the courage to answer. Emily felt the words hit like a slap. You want me to ask Jonathan Hale for money? Margaret shrugged, exhaling smoke toward the ceiling. I want you to save this family from losing our home. How you do it is up to you. The kitchen fell silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Emily stared at her stepmother, at the perfect hair, the painted nails, the robe that probably cost more than Emily's month of groceries. Her father's voice came back to her, faint and tired. Don't let them take your kindness for weakness? Sweetheart, you think this place is home? Emily asked softly. It stopped being home the day you turned it into a debt collector's waiting room. Margaret's eyes flashed. Watch your tone. I'm just tired. Margaret, Emily said. Tired of being the only one trying to hold everything together. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. I can talk to some friends, maybe get a gig. You'll make $50 and spend $60 getting there. Margaret snapped. We need real money, not bar tips. Emily turned toward the window. Snow had started again, dusting the narrow alley below. I can't keep doing this. You don't have a choice, Margaret said coldly. Family comes first. Funny, Emily murmured. It only feels like family when you need a check. Margaret stubbed out her cigarette, leaving a small burn mark on the table. Don't take that tone with me. You've always thought you were better than the rest of us. I never said that. You didn't have to. You left this house the second you could. You built your little life with your little job and forgot who kept a roof over your head when your father died. Don't, Emily said sharply. Don't use him to make me feel guilty. The silence that followed was knife-thin. Finally, Margaret leaned forward, her voice low and deliberate. You work for a rich man. Emily, start acting like it? Emily stared at her, a dozen retorts burning behind her teeth, but none strong enough to change the air in the room. She picked up her purse and coat instead. I'm going to work, she said, voice calm but shaking. And for the record, Margaret, I don't act rich because I remember what it's like to be decent. She left before Margaret could answer. The hallway was cold, and the stairwell smelled of damp plaster, but the air out there was easier to breathe. As she stepped into the gray morning, snowflakes melting on her lashes, Emily felt the full weight of her stepmother's words pressing against her chest. Maybe Margaret didn't mean it. Maybe she did. Either way, the damage was done. The email arrived just after noon. Subject client presentation, Chicago, Wednesday, Friday. From Patricia Langley to Emily Carter. Mr. Hale has requested your presence for the Morrison proposal presentation. Please confirm your availability immediately. Emily read the line 3 times before it sank in. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, her pulse steadying itself out of sheer discipline. Requested your presence, not the department's, not the analytics team's, but hers. She typed a polite reply. Confirmed, thank you, Ms. Langley, and hit send before she could change her mind. From across the open floor, Grace Linton looked up from her desk, eyebrows arched. Chicago, she mouthed. Emily nodded faintly. Grace's smirk said everything her friend didn't dare speak aloud. The morning of the flight was brutally cold, the kind of cold that turned the air brittle and made sound travel sharper. Emily wore her navy blazer and a wool coat, clutching a leather portfolio like armor. At Logan Airport, she spotted Jonathan near the gate, crisp suit, coat folded over his arm, a phone pressed to his ear. He looked entirely in his element, as if even terminals bent subtly around his gravity. When he saw her, his expression softened just enough to make her forget how to breathe for a moment. Good morning, he said, slipping the phone into his pocket. Did you sleep a little? She lied. Good, he said, with a hint of a smile. "You'll need the energy. Morrison's a shark." The boarding announcement saved her from having to answer. On the plane, their seats were side by side in first class, a detail that didn't feel accidental. Emily busied herself with the safety card, the buckle, anything but the fact that their elbows nearly brushed when they settled in. The engines roared to life. Boston slipped away beneath a layer of gray clouds. Jonathan opened his laptop. "You can review the slide deck if you'd like," he said without looking up. She accepted the gesture with a nod, grateful for the distraction. The screen glowed between them, filled with graphs, projections, bullet points, safe things. For the next hour, they discussed market forecasts and client expectations in a tone so professional it almost convinced her that the world hadn't changed between them. Almost. But every now and then, she caught him glancing her way quick, unguarded looks that carried too much memory. When turbulence shook the cabin briefly, her hand instinctively gripped the armrest. Jonathan's hand covered hers before she could pull away a steadying touch. Brief but electric. "Just air pockets," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, though her heart didn't. He withdrew his hand slowly, leaving behind a silence that neither dared to fill. They landed in Chicago under a pale afternoon sky dusted with snow. A driver waited to take them downtown to the Hale Tech regional offices. Emily watched the skyline glide past the window, the glass towers, the frozen river, the city pulsing with the same ambition that both of them carried like second skin. By the time they reached the hotel, her nerves had settled into something taut but calm. The check-in clerk handed her a key card. "Your rooms are adjacent," the woman said cheerfully. "Mr. Hale, Ms. Carter, welcome to the Palmer Grand." Adjacent. Emily caught Jonathan's brief glance unreadable, polite, and offered a tight smile in return. "Thank you," she said to the clerk, as though nothing about it mattered. The day passed in a blur of meetings and numbers. Morrison, the client, was as sharp-tongued as promised, but Emily's composure never faltered. Her analysis was clear, her confidence precise, and Jonathan watched her with something that looked dangerously close to pride. By evening, the deal was nearly secured. Morrison's team left satisfied, the conference room emptied, leaving only the two of them gathering their notes. Jonathan broke the quiet first. "You were brilliant today." Emily shook her head. "Just prepared." He smiled faintly. Prepared doesn't usually make a man like Morrison nod in approval. "You did." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Thank you," she said softly. He hesitated, then added, "You should eat something. I ordered room service for us to go over the final details before tomorrow." "Of course," she said, keeping her tone neutral, even as her pulse quickened. Half an hour later, she knocked on his door. The suite was elegant, understated beige walls, soft lighting, the hum of jazz from the radio. Dinner waited on a small table near the window, city lights glittering beyond the glass. Jonathan gestured toward the food. "I wasn't sure what you'd want, so I ordered both salmon and pasta. You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said simply. They ate mostly in silence at first, the clink of silverware against porcelain filling the space. Then, as the conversation drifted from business to safer ground, the tension began to thaw. He asked about her father, about Maine, about why she chose marketing instead of law like she'd once planned. She laughed quietly. Law seemed too rigid. Marketing felt like telling stories that might actually change something. "That's what you do best," he said. "You make people believe in things." She looked down at her plate. "That's not always a good thing." His voice softened. "It is when the belief is real." The words hung between them. Outside, snowflakes brushed the windows, melting against the warmth inside. Emily took a slow breath. "Jonathan, this can't happen again." He didn't answer immediately. He just leaned back, studying her the way he did with problems he couldn't solve. "You keep saying that," he said finally, "because it's true." He nodded slowly, then looked away toward the window, his reflection faint in the glass. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said quietly. Her breath caught. "It's not logical," he continued. "It's not appropriate. But every time I close my eyes, I see you in that green dress, standing in a room full of people who don't deserve your honesty. And I don't know how to stop wanting to see you again." The honesty in his tone, quiet, uncalculated, left her without defense. She wanted to tell him it wasn't fair, that they couldn't afford the consequences. But part of her didn't want to silence him at all. Instead, she whispered the only truth she could bear. "You should." He looked at her then, eyes searching hers. Should what? Stop thinking about me? He smiled sadly. "If I could, I would." Outside, the city lights flickered in the snow. Inside, the silence between them said everything neither dared to speak aloud. Morning sunlight cut through the curtains of the Palmer Grand Hotel, soft but unkind. Emily stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching Chicago wake beneath a veil of mist. The meeting with Morrison had gone perfectly, the contract nearly signed, yet she felt a weight she couldn't name. Jonathan had already gone down to the lobby to handle press calls, leaving behind a quiet suite and the faint trace of his cologne. The silence pressed against her chest. Her phone buzzed on the table. She almost ignored it until she saw the caller ID, Margaret Carter. Her stomach dropped. Margaret rarely called in the morning and never twice in a row. "Hello," Emily said cautiously. Her stepmother's voice came fast, sharp, already trembling. "Emily, thank God you answered. What's wrong?" "The bank," Margaret blurted. "They sent the notice. Foreclosure proceedings. They're taking the house. Emily, next week." Emily's pulse spiked. "What do you mean next week? We still had time. We did. Until the loan defaulted. They're serious this time. I tried calling them. I begged." Margaret's voice broke, then hardened again. "They want the full balance by Friday." Emily pressed a hand to her forehead. The city blurred beyond the glass. "How much?" "25,000, Margaret said, almost whispering. "Please, Emily, I can't lose this house." Emily turned away from the window, pacing. "I don't have that kind of money. You work for a man who does." Margaret snapped. "You said yourself he's been good to you. Just ask him for a loan, tell him it's for medical bills, or stop." Emily said sharply. "I'm not asking Jonathan Hale for money." "You'd rather see us on the street. You mean you and Ethan," Emily said, voice shaking. "Don't drag me into your mistakes." "Margaret." There was silence on the line, then the cool click of a cigarette lighter. "You've always thought you were better than us. Maybe you are. But if you walk away from this, you'll remember it for the rest of your life that you could have helped and didn't." Emily's breath hitched. She wanted to argue, to shout. But the exhaustion in her bones spoke louder. "I'll call the bank," she said finally. "I'll see what I can do." Emily. But she'd already hung up. She didn't hear the door open until Jonathan's voice cut through the silence. "Everything all right?" Emily spun around, startled. He was standing near the doorway, phone still in his hand, his brow furrowed. "Sorry," she said quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just a personal call." He didn't buy it. From the sound of it, not a pleasant one. "It's nothing." She lied. "Emily," his tone softened, the way it did when he wanted the truth. "Talk to me." She turned away, staring at the skyline again. "It's not your problem. Let me decide that." She hesitated. Then, because the words were too heavy to hold alone, she let them fall. "It's my stepmother. The house in South Boston, the one my dad left us, they're losing it. The bank's moving forward with foreclosure." Jonathan stepped closer. "How much do they need?" "It doesn't matter," she said quickly. "I'm not asking you for money. I didn't say you were good, because I'm not." Her voice cracked on the last word. She set her coffee down before her hands could betray her. He watched her carefully. "Emily, if you're in trouble, I can help. You already helped me," she said. "You give me a job, a paycheck. That's enough. That's not what I meant." "I know exactly what you meant," she said, spinning to face him. "You meant another favor, another debt I'd have to live with. I can't. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. It's not a debt. It's compassion. It's pity, she snapped, then flinched at her own tone. I'm sorry. I can't blur the lines more than we already have. Jonathan studied her, silent. The hurt in his eyes wasn't pride. It was something quieter, almost understanding. I'm not trying to buy you, he said finally. I just don't like watching someone I care about drown because they're too proud to reach for the rope. The word care hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. Emily swallowed hard. You don't even know me. I know enough. Her throat tightened. You know the part of me that works for you. You don't know the part that grew up balancing eviction notices with report cards. He smiled sadly. You think that makes you the only one who's had to fight to stay afloat. She looked up at him, then really looked. The guarded CEO she'd once feared seemed far away. In his place stood a man stripped of titles, offering help not from power, but from empathy. I won't let you fix this, she said quietly. Why not? Because if you fix it, she whispered, then every time I look at you, I'll wonder if what we have, whatever this is, was built on charity. He exhaled slowly. You think so little of me? No, she said. I think too much of you. And that's the problem. They stood there in silence, the city's hum filling the spaces their words couldn't. Jonathan turned toward his briefcase, opened it, and pulled out his phone. Give me the name of the bank. Jonathan. No. I'm not asking, he said, already scrolling through contacts. She stepped forward, grabbing his arm. Don't. Her voice trembled, more plea than command. He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then up at her face. The defiance in her eyes was bright and terrified. Don't, she whispered again. Please. But he was already dialing. Jonathan. He met her gaze, calm and resolute. Consider it a loan from the company. Nothing more. Her hand fell away as the call connected. She stood frozen, listening to the measured cadence of his voice steady. Efficient. The voice of a man accustomed to making impossible things vanish with a single instruction. Within minutes, he ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. It's done. Emily's breath shuddered out of her. You had no right. I had every right, he said quietly. You forget I'm your employer. And if one of my best employees is being threatened by circumstances beyond her control, I have the right to intervene. That's not why you did it? No, he admitted. It's not. Tears pricked her eyes. You shouldn't have. Maybe not, he said, but I couldn't stand by and watch you suffer for other people's mistakes. She turned away, blinking hard, gripping the back of a chair to keep her balance. Pride battled gratitude, shame tangled with relief, all of it too much to contain. Jonathan, she whispered, her voice breaking. Don't. He didn't answer, because he already had. Snow still clung to the edges of the streets when their plane landed back in Boston. The sky was a dull pewter, heavy with more snow to come. Emily barely remembered the flight the polite words exchanged, the safe topics discussed. Every moment between them had been too careful, too edited, as though both were afraid of saying what hovered unsaid. By the time she stepped off the company car and into her apartment, exhaustion settled over her like a second coat. She set her suitcase by the door and exhaled, half relief, half dread. The message light on the answering machine blinked red. She pressed play. Ms. Carter, this is Valerie with East Bank Mortgage. I wanted to confirm receipt of the transfer full payment on the Carter account. The foreclosure has been canceled. Congratulations, and thank you for your prompt resolution. Emily froze. Her hand hovered above the machine, the voice still echoing in the room. Transfer, full payment. Her stomach dropped. She sat down slowly, the world narrowing to the sound of her own heartbeat. There was only one person who could have made that call, only one man with the power and the arrogance to do it behind her back. Jonathan. Her pulse thundered in her ears. He didn't. But he had. Of course he had. The next morning, she walked into Hail Tech with her chin high and her jaw set. She rehearsed her words during the elevator ride, short, direct, controlled. She would not cry, not shout, just end whatever illusion had begun to grow between them before it poisoned what was left of her self-respect. Patricia glanced up as Emily passed her desk. "He's expecting you," she said quietly. Of course he was. Emily knocked once, then entered before he could answer. Jonathan stood by the window, phone in hand, city light cutting through the glass. He turned, and the faint smile that rose when he saw her faltered at the look on her face. "Emily," he said cautiously, "you're early." She closed the door behind her. "You paid off the mortgage. He didn't deny it. I did." Her throat tightened. Why? Because it was the right thing to do. "No," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the room. "It was the easy thing to do. The powerful thing. You made a decision that wasn't yours to make." Jonathan set his phone down on the desk. "You were drowning. I threw you a rope. You call that kindness?" She took a step closer. "You turned love into charity." The word love slipped out before she could stop it. It hung there between them like a spark in dry air. Jonathan blinked, startled but not at the accusation, at the truth hidden inside it. "Emily," he said softly. "Don't," she whispered, shaking her head. "Don't try to make this sound noble. You didn't save me, you humiliated me. You took something I was barely holding on to, my independence, my pride, and you turned it into a transaction." His expression tightened, guilt flickering across his features. "That was never my intention. But that's what you did," she said. "You made me one of them. Another person who owes you something." He stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do," she said bitterly. "Because you can say those words, but you'll never unmake the fact that I didn't have a choice. You decided for me. You decided that I couldn't handle my own life." Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling hard. "You're angry because you think I see you as weak, but that's the opposite of what I see. You're the strongest person in this company, maybe the strongest I've ever met. You just don't know how to accept help." "I don't need help," she said quietly. "Everyone needs help. Not like this," she snapped. "Not from someone who holds my paycheck, my reputation, my—" She stopped herself before saying, "heart." Jonathan's eyes softened. "You think I did this to control you? But that's not it. I did it because the thought of you losing your home kept me awake, because I couldn't bear the idea that you'd carry that burden alone. That's not love, Jonathan," she said. "That's guilt wrapped in generosity." He flinched slightly. The honesty in her words landed like a stone. "I know you meant well," she continued, her voice breaking now. "But you can't keep rescuing people and calling it compassion. It's control. You decide who gets saved, and you feel better about yourself for doing it." Silence filled the room, a silence that felt heavier than any argument could. The only sound was the soft hum of the city below. Jonathan looked at her, searching for something in her eyes that wasn't there anymore. "I thought you'd be relieved," he said finally. "I was," she admitted, "for 5 seconds. Then I realized what it cost me." He took another step toward her, voice softer now. "You can hate me if you need to, but I don't regret helping you." "I don't hate you," she said. "That would be easier." She turned toward the door, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just can't forgive you." Jonathan stood still, his shadow stretching long across the polished floor. "I didn't do this to make you feel small," he said quietly. "I did it because I care about you more than I should." Emily paused at the door, her hand on the handle. She didn't look back. "And that's exactly why you shouldn't have done it at all." The latch clicked softly as she left. Jonathan remained by the window, staring out at the skyline, the same skyline he once believed he ruled. But that morning, all he saw was reflection. His own face, pale against the glass, framed by the city that suddenly looked colder than it ever had. He whispered something no one else would ever hear. Then, What was I supposed to do? Let her fall? The city, indifferent as ever, didn't answer, and the silence that followed was heavier than any argument could have been. It began with whispers. At first, Emily thought she imagined them the faint murmur that fell silent when she entered the break room, the half-finished sentences cut short in the hallway. Hale Tech had always been a hive of quiet gossip, but that morning, the air felt different, thick, watchful, cruel. By 9 o'clock, she knew. Grace Linton appeared at her cubicle, her usual brightness dimmed. "Emily," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "You should probably stay off the internet for a while." Emily frowned. "What are you talking about?" Grace hesitated, then opened her phone, turning the screen toward her. A headline stared back, bold and merciless: Hale Tech CEO's secret affair. Inside the scandal between Jonathan Hale and his secretary. Beneath it, a photo, her and Jonathan, in the hotel bar in Chicago, their hands barely touching, eyes locked in a moment too intimate to explain away. The room seemed to tilt. She scrolled through the article with shaking fingers. Every paragraph dug deeper details about the anonymous payment that had rescued her family's home, the romantic weekend in Chicago, and a string of insinuations so artfully poisonous they almost sounded factual. At the bottom, a line that made her stomach drop. According to a family insider, Ms. Carter has always been ambitious. She knew what she was doing when she set her sights on the boss. Her breath caught. A family insider, Margaret. The world went white around the edges. She barely heard Grace's voice. "Emily, maybe you should go home. Or talk to HR." "No," Emily said, forcing air into her lungs. "No, I need to work." She closed the article, set the phone face down, and focused on the monitor as if spreadsheets could drown out humiliation. But her fingers wouldn't move. Across the floor, she could feel the eyes, the darting glances, the pity, the curiosity. In an office built on polished glass and open transparency, there was nowhere to hide. By 10:30, Patricia Langley appeared at her desk. "Mr. Hale would like to see you," she said, voice formal, gaze sympathetic. Of course he would. Jonathan's office felt colder than usual, though sunlight still spilled across the floor. He stood behind his desk, phone in hand, jaw tight. When she entered, he ended the call abruptly. "Emily," he said, his voice low. "You've seen it." She nodded. "Everyone has." He exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "The board's in damage control mode. PR is drafting statements. They're insisting I issue a denial." Her chest ached. "And will you?" He looked up, meeting her eyes. "No." Her throat tightened. "Jonathan, I won't lie about what happened," he said firmly. "But I'll make sure they understand this was private, personal, no one's business but ours." The words "but ours" cut deep, not because of tenderness, but because they reminded her that whatever they had was no longer theirs at all. It belonged to headlines, strangers, and office gossip now. She sank into the chair across from him. "They know about the payment. I know." "How?" He hesitated. "Someone leaked the bank transaction to the press. It was routed through the company's charitable foundation. They twisted it into something else. Someone had to tell them where to look," she whispered. Jonathan's eyes darkened. "Do you have any idea who?" She hesitated, then forced the truth out. "My stepmother, Margaret. She's the only one who knew." The silence that followed felt like a wound tearing open. Jonathan's voice was careful when he finally spoke. "Emily, I'm sorry," she laughed, but it broke halfway through. "Don't be. You warned me people would talk. I just didn't think it would be her." He stepped around the desk, stopping a few feet away. "What can I do?" "Nothing," she said. "You've done enough." "Emily, I mean it," she interrupted. "If you try to protect me now, it'll only make things worse. They'll say you're covering for me, that it's all true." "It is true," he said quietly. She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "Not like this, not in the way they've written it. You and I were..." She stopped herself, searching for a word that didn't exist. Whatever we were, it wasn't this. Jonathan reached for her hand, then hesitated, realizing even that gesture would become evidence. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and stood. I should go. Emily. His voice softened. You don't have to do this alone. Yes, I do, she said, forcing steadiness into her tone. Because you can survive this. You're Jonathan Hale. You'll give a statement, shake a few hands, and the world will move on. And you, I'm the woman in the headline, she said. We don't get to move on. We just get remembered. Her words hung in the air, bitter and true. She left before he could answer. Back at her desk, the office hum had become unbearable. The sound of typing, the ring of phones, the click of heels all normal, yet sharpened by the undercurrent of scandal. Grace tried to catch her eye once, but Emily couldn't bring herself to look up. Every movement felt staged, every breath measured. By noon, her inbox was full of messages. She couldn't read a few kind, most cruel, all-invasive. She shut the laptop, leaned back, and closed her eyes. The resignation letter sat printed in her drawer, dated 2 weeks ago, a precaution she'd written on one of those sleepless nights when her conscience had screamed that nothing good could come from loving a man like Jonathan Hale. Her hand hovered over the paper. She could end it all now, walk away, find another job, rebuild her name somewhere no one would recognize it. But as she stared at the letter, she remembered something Jonathan had said in that same office not long ago. Then we'll let time decide who's right. Her breath steadied. The humiliation, the betrayal, the whispers, they were all real. But so was the part of her that refused to break. She tore the letter cleanly in half, then again, until the words were unreadable. If the world wanted to watch, let them. I'll face this, she whispered, her voice steady now. On my own terms. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, unhurried, indifferent to the noise below. The conference room on the 43rd floor was a glass cage in the sky, all sleek lines, steel accents, and a panoramic view of Boston glittering beneath a winter sun. The kind of room built for power, not for mercy. Emily sat near the end of the long mahogany table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The board members gathered one by one, their polished shoes clicking against the marble floor, their voices hushed but heavy with anticipation. She felt like a defendant awaiting sentencing. At the head of the table stood Jonathan Hale, his back straight, his expression carved from stone. His usual calm was there, but it was the kind that came before a storm. When the last chair scraped into place, Harold Whitman, the board's chairman, cleared his throat. He was a silver-haired man with the patience of a shark. Thank you for joining us. Everyone, he began. As you all know, we're here to discuss the recent publicity crisis concerning Hale Tech's leadership and, internal ethics. The word ethics landed like a slap. Whitman's gaze flicked toward Emily, then away again, as though she were an inconvenient reflection. Jonathan's voice broke the silence. Let's skip the euphemisms. Harold, you're talking about the article. A murmur rippled around the table. Whitman clasped his hands. Yes. The piece has already circulated through major outlets. Investors are concerned. Clients are asking questions. And the board has an obligation to protect the company. Jonathan finished. Not my reputation. Understood. Whitman inclined his head slightly. In this case, the two are intertwined. He turned to Emily. Ms. Carter, perhaps you can shed light on your relationship with Mr. Hale and confirm whether the financial transaction described in the article occurred. Emily's throat tightened. The room seemed to tilt again, every pair of eyes a weight pressing down on her. Jonathan's voice was low but sharp. She doesn't have to answer that. With respect. Jonathan, Whitman said, his tone silk over steel. This isn't a personal matter anymore. The integrity of the company is at stake. If there was an inappropriate exchange, it must be addressed formally. Inappropriate. Jonathan repeated, his jaw tightening. You mean the loan that saved an employee's home? Yes, I authorized it. Through a legal, documented channel. Whitman frowned. Without consulting the board, I don't need board approval for discretionary employee assistance, Jonathan said coldly. And I won't apologize for acting like a human being. The room went still. Emily wished she could disappear into the floor. She wanted to speak, to defend him, but every word she imagined only made the trap tighter. Anything she said could be twisted devotion, mistaken for manipulation. Truth mistaken for guilt. One of the younger board members, a woman named Claire Eaton, cleared her throat. With all due respect, Jonathan, this isn't about compassion. It's about perception. The optics of this are disastrous. You were photographed holding her hand. Jonathan turned slowly toward her. Would you prefer I held a check instead? A few gasps broke the tension. Whitman's tone hardened. Jonathan, please. This isn't a joke. I'm not laughing, Jonathan said. But I am disgusted. The speed with which you all turned this into a witch hunt tells me more about this board than any headline ever could. He looked around the table, his gaze cold and unwavering. You think this company runs on good PR. It runs on loyalty, on work, on people like Ms. Carter, people who show up early, stay late, and do their jobs without expecting a spotlight. And when one of them needs help, I'll help, scandal or not. Whitman's eyes narrowed. You're emotional. Jonathan smiled faintly, but it was a dangerous smile. Good. That means I'm still alive. Emily could feel every heartbeat in her chest. Her palms were damp, her breathing shallow. Mr. Hale, another board member interjected cautiously, we all respect your leadership. But investors, Jonathan interrupted, will get their quarterly returns as always. What they won't get is a company that sacrifices its people to appease rumor mills. Whitman leaned forward, his voice dropping to a deliberate calm. If you continue to let your personal involvement cloud your judgment, the board may have no choice but to review your position as CEO. The air went still. Jonathan's expression didn't change, but a vein pulsed near his temple. You'd remove me, he said softly, for caring about someone, for compromising the company. Whitman said, and yes, if necessary. Emily finally found her voice. Please, she said quietly. This isn't necessary. The story is exaggerated. I can clarify everything. The payment wasn't personal. It was structured through Whitman. Cut her off. Ms. Carter, with respect, this meeting is for executives. The dismissal was polite but final. The humiliation stung worse than open insult. She felt heat rise to her face, her voice catching in her throat. Jonathan's hand came down on the table with a sharp crack. Don't you dare speak to her that way. The words silenced the room. Whitman blinked. Jonathan? She works for this company, Jonathan said, his voice trembling now, not with fear, but fury barely contained. And as long as she does, she will be treated with the respect she's earned. Mr. Hale, enough. The single word cut through the air like a blade. He turned to Emily, and for a moment, the mask slipped the steel, the control revealing a flicker of something raw, worry, protectiveness, regret. Then he faced the board again. Everyone out? No one moved? Whitman cleared his throat. Jonathan, this isn't, I set out. Jonathan repeated, his voice breaking slightly at the edge. One by one, chairs scraped back. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, collecting their papers, muttering under their breath as they filed toward the door. The last to leave was Whitman, who paused, studying Jonathan with a mixture of warning and pity. You're making this worse, he said quietly. Jonathan didn't answer. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing the room in silence. Emily sat frozen, her heart pounding. Jonathan stood at the head of the table, shoulders tense, staring at the empty seats as though he could still see their judgment lingering in the air. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry you had to sit through that. Emily shook her head, her throat tight. You shouldn't have defended me like that. Yes, I should have, he said, turning toward her. And I'd do it again. The words were quiet, but they trembled heavy with everything he couldn't say in front of anyone else. Outside the glass walls, the city carried on, unaware that in one corner, office, a man and woman had just lost something neither could name the illusion of safety. The office was dark except for the faint glow from the city beyond the glass. Boston's skyline shimmered through the snow, each light a small heartbeat in the cold. Emily stood near the window, arms wrapped around herself, watching the headlights move along the harbor road far below. She had come here to resign, to end whatever fragile thread still connected her to Jonathan Hale. But now, standing in his office after the boardroom chaos, she couldn't find the words. Behind her, the door clicked shut. Jonathan entered quietly, his footsteps steady but heavy. Neither spoke for a long time. The silence was a third presence between them, familiar, intimate, unbearable. Finally, he said, they're calling for my resignation. Emily turned. The board. He nodded, unbuttoning his jacket with deliberate calm. Whitman says investors want a fresh start. A clean image. Apparently, I've become messy. Her heart ached at the exhaustion in his tone. I'm sorry. Don't be. He gave a tired smile. I'm the one who made this bed. She looked down, twisting her hands together. You shouldn't have defended me. I couldn't do anything else. You could have stayed silent. I've spent my whole life staying silent, he said, his voice low but sharp with honesty. When my father ran this company, I stayed silent. When he died, I stayed silent about how much I hated what he'd turned me into. I won't do it again. Emily turned back toward the window. The reflection showed him standing a few feet away, his face pale against the dark glass, eyes full of something she didn't dare name. I don't want to be another mistake you have to defend, she said softly. He took a step closer. You're not a mistake. Then what am I? He hesitated. The first real thing that's happened to me in years. Her chest tightened. Jonathan, I'm serious, he said, his voice trembling just slightly now. You make me remember what it feels like to care about something that isn't a deal or a quarterly report. You make me? He stopped, his throat working around the words he'd never said aloud. Human. He finished quietly. The confession hung in the air, fragile as glass. Emily closed her eyes. Part of her wanted to believe him to step closer, to rest her forehead against his chest, to forget everything outside this office. But another part of her knew better. Don't say things you can't take back, she whispered. I don't want to take it back, he said, moving closer. I love you, Emily. The words hit her like a gust of wind, not loud, not desperate, but real. She turned to face him. His eyes were steady, unguarded, stripped of all the armor he wore in public. You don't mean that, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I do. You think you do, she corrected. You think it's love because it's forbidden, because it's falling apart. You're trying to save something that never had a chance to survive. He shook his head slowly. I know the difference between guilt and love. Do you? He stepped closer until they were just a breath apart. Yes. Guilt feels heavy. Love feels like this. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She could feel the warmth radiating off him, could smell the faint trace of cedar and coffee that always clung to his shirts. Jonathan, you're about to lose everything, she said softly. Your company, your reputation. None of that matters. It does, she said, tears filling her eyes. It's who you are. He reached up, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. It's who I was. Not anymore. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But the ache inside her wouldn't let her. You think love fixes things, she whispered. But it doesn't. It breaks them open. And once they're open, you can't put them back together. He searched her face. Then tell me what to do. Let me go. The words left her lips before she could stop them. Jonathan froze. What? Let me go, she repeated, her voice steady now. Before this destroys both of us? He shook his head slowly. I can't. You have to. He took another step forward, desperation breaking through his calm. You're asking me to walk away from the only thing that's ever felt right. I'm asking you to be brave, she said, to prove that what you feel isn't possession, it's love. He stared at her, breathing hard, torn between reason and desire. You're the one thing in my life that isn't strategic, the one thing that isn't calculated, then keep it that way, she said. Don't turn it into another negotiation. His eyes glistened. You're stronger than I am? No, she said softly. I'm just tired. He laughed quietly, the sound cracked and sad. You always win the arguments I never wanted to have. Emily smiled faintly through her tears. Then take this as the last one. The silence that followed was long and unbearable. Jonathan looked away first, staring out at the city beyond the glass. If I let you go, he said finally, I'll regret it every day. She nodded. Then love me enough to let me go. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, she could see the surrender there, the quiet breaking of a man who had finally understood that power couldn't save him from loss. She reached for his hand, squeezed it once, a gesture full of everything she couldn't say, then turned toward the door. Emily, he called softly. She paused. I meant it, he said. Every word. I know, she whispered. That's what makes it harder. Then she walked out, the echo of her footsteps fading down the corridor. Jonathan stayed where he was, staring at the reflection of her silhouette disappearing into the city's night. His hands still tingled from her touch, his chest hollowed by the weight of what he'd said and what she'd made him understand. Outside, snow fell against the glass, soft and relentless. Inside, the man who'd built an empire finally learned what it meant to lose something money could never buy. The morning she left Boston, the city was wrapped in fog. Emily stood on the curb beside the moving van, watching her breath curl into the gray air. Her entire life fit into a handful of boxes, one for books, one for clothes, one for everything else that didn't belong anywhere in particular. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She handed the driver the Portland address and watched the truck disappear down the street. Then she took one last look at the skyline, the glass towers cutting through the mist, and felt an ache that was softer than sadness, but deeper than relief. Boston had given her ambition, heartbreak, and lessons she hadn't known she needed. But it had taken enough from her, too. It was time to start somewhere she could breathe. The drive north was long and quiet. Snow turned to rain near the coast, the windshield wipers keeping a slow, meditative rhythm. By the time she reached Portland, the rain had eased into mist again, the kind that clung gently to the harbor like a sigh. She parked near the pier, stepped out of the car, and inhaled the salt air. It smelled like her childhood, like seaweed, cold wind, and freedom. Her new apartment sat above a bakery on 4th Street, 2 small rooms with peeling paint and windows that faced the water. When she opened them, the ocean air filled the space, carrying the faint sound of gulls and the low hum of boat engines. It wasn't much, but it was perfect. That evening, she unpacked slowly, taking her time with each item, not because she had many, but because each one carried a story. The coffee mug from her first day at Hale Tech, her father's old wristwatch, the band cracked but still ticking, a photo of him smiling in front of their old house, long before life became complicated. When she was done, she sat on the floor beside the window, with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, listening to the rain start again. For the first time in months, she didn't feel watched, or judged, or small, just still. 2 weeks later, she opened the doors of her new business, Carter & Co., marketing. The office was small, a single room above a local print shop, but sunlight poured through the front windows each morning, and the view of the harbor made every challenge seem worth facing. Her first clients were local, a family-owned seafood market, a small bookstore, a craftsman who made handmade furniture from reclaimed wood. None of them were glamorous accounts, but they were real people with real stories in that. Emily realized was exactly what she'd always wanted to work for. She handled every detail herself, drafting copy, designing campaigns, answering emails, even sweeping the floor before clients arrived. There were no boardrooms, no whispered politics, no fear of scandal, only the quiet satisfaction of building something from nothing. Sometimes, when the phone rang and she answered with her own company's name, she'd smile to herself, still surprised to hear it spoken aloud. "This is mine," she would think, all of it. On Sunday mornings, she walked down to the docks with a notebook and coffee, sitting on the worn wooden benches to watch the boats come in. The harbor was always busy fishermen unloading their catch, children chasing gulls, couples walking hand in hand. It was noisy, alive, and beautifully ordinary. She began writing again, not reports or proposals, but pieces of thought, memory, and quiet reflection. Pages filled with fragments of her life, the smell of rain on glass, the sound of Jonathan's voice saying her name, the feeling of leaving something behind without hating it. She didn't know what those pages would become, only that they made her feel whole again. Some nights, she dreamed of him, not the boardrooms or the scandal, but the man who once stood in front of her and said he loved her with a kind of desperate truth she couldn't unhear. In those dreams, he wasn't a CEO or a savior. He was just Jonathan, tired, human, trying. And when she woke, she didn't cry. She just whispered, "Thank you," into the quiet room. Because love, she'd learned, didn't always mean forever. Sometimes it meant letting go. And sometimes it meant finding yourself in the space that letting go created. By spring, the business was steady. Her name appeared in the local paper, once young entrepreneur brings fresh vision to Portland's business scene. She'd smiled when she read it, then folded the clipping and tucked it in her desk drawer. Success felt different now, quieter, cleaner. It no longer needed applause. One afternoon, she walked to the pier at sunset. The ocean stretched out like a sheet of silver, the air cool but kind. She sat on the railing, her hair loose in the wind, and let her mind wander. There was no bitterness left, no resentment toward Jonathan or the past, just a quiet understanding that every ending was really a beginning in disguise. She watched a small fishing boat drift toward open water, its wake cutting a clean line across the harbor's surface. The sight filled her with something that felt like peace. She thought about how far she'd come from the marble floors of Hale-Tech's tower to this open horizon. The contrast was almost poetic. One world had been made of glass and power. This one was made of salt and air. And yet, both had shaped her. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. For once, there was no rush, no fear of what people thought, no need to prove anything, just the sound of water, just the promise of possibility. When she opened her eyes again, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the first stars blinked above the harbor. She smiled softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. For once. "I'm not running," she said. "I'm beginning." The wind carried her words out over the water, scattering them like seeds, tiny fragments of a life that, at last, belonged entirely to her. 6 months had passed since Emily last saw Jonathan Hale. The seasons had shifted gently along the Maine coast. Winter thawed into rain, and rain gave way to a soft, salt-scented spring. The city was brighter now, busier, or maybe she was just learning to notice it differently. Carter & Co. had grown faster than she'd dared to hope. What began as a one-woman operation had become a small, buzzing studio. 3 employees, 5 steady clients, and a waiting list long enough to keep her awake at night, planning for expansion. On this particular morning, sunlight poured through the window of her modest office. The walls were lined with framed campaign prints, bright, clean designs that spoke of authenticity and story. Emily sat at her desk, reviewing a partnership proposal from a local craft brewery when a soft knock sounded at the door. "Come in," she said without looking up. The door opened, still working through lunch. "I see." The voice froze her mid-breath. She looked up slowly. Jonathan Hale stood in the doorway, a little thinner than she remembered, a trace of gray at his temples, his expression gentle but uncertain. Gone was the power suit and the perfect posture. He wore a dark coat over a simple sweater, his hands bare of the watch that once marked his every hour. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, she found her voice. "You look different." He smiled faintly. "So do you." The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time, just full. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I was in Portland for a conference," he said. "I heard Carter & Co. has been making quite the impression. I thought I should see it for myself." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "You could have called. I wasn't sure you'd answer," he admitted. "You're probably right." He smiled again, that quiet, self-aware smile she remembered from long ago. "Then, I'm glad I took the risk." They sat facing each other, the hum of the harbor drifting through the open window. Jonathan glanced around the office, the organized clutter, the small whiteboard covered in notes, the plant leaning toward the light. "This place suits you," he said. "It feels alive." "It's small," she said, a little embarrassed. "It's yours," he replied. That simple truth made her smile. "Yes, it is." He nodded slowly. "I'm proud of you, Emily." The words landed softly, without the weight of pity or romance, just genuine admiration. She leaned back, folding her hands. "I heard Hale Tech merged with another firm. 2 months ago," he said. "They offered me a reduced role. I declined. So you're free now." He chuckled. "If by free you mean unemployed, then yes." She smiled, relaxing. "You never struck me as someone who could sit still for long. Turns out, I can, for the right reasons." Their eyes met. No tension, no pretense, just quiet acknowledgement of everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. Jonathan reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Actually, I came for more than nostalgia." She raised an eyebrow. "Business? In a way?" He slid the folder across the desk. "A partnership proposal. From a nonprofit, I've started the Hale Foundation for Ethical Entrepreneurship. We help small, women-led businesses get access to funding and mentorship. I'd like Carter & Co. to handle the branding and community outreach." Emily blinked. "You're serious completely?" She opened the folder, scanning the first page. Her name appeared there. Carter & Co., Marketing Strategic Communications Partner. Her throat tightened. "Jonathan, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said simply. "Not because it's from me, but because you deserve to be seen for what you've built." She looked up. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," he said. "That's why I wanted to." There was no grand gesture in his voice, no need for forgiveness or repayment. Just a man trying to make things right in the quiet way that maturity allows. She set the folder down carefully. "It's a good proposal." "I'll think about it." "Of course," he said. "Take all the time you need." A comfortable stillness settled between them. After a moment, Jonathan stood and walked to the window. "You can smell the ocean from here," he said. "You can." She agreed. "It's different from Boston." He nodded. "Cleaner. Honest." She studied him, the calm in his posture, the absence of the restless energy that used to define him. "You seem at peace," she said. "I am," he admitted, for the first time in a long time. She smiled faintly. "So am I." He turned back toward her, sunlight catching the edge of his profile. "I didn't come here to reopen old wounds. Emily, I just wanted you to know. You were right. About what? About love. About letting go. Sometimes it's the only way to save both people." She nodded, her eyes softening. "I wasn't trying to save you, Jonathan. I was trying to save myself. And you did," he said. "And somehow, you saved me too." Her breath caught. For a long moment, neither moved. Then he smiled, warm, genuine, unguarded. "You've built something beautiful here," he said quietly. "I never stopped believing in you." The words hit her with unexpected tenderness. Not romantic, not desperate, just true. She rose from her chair and extended her hand. Thank you for believing, even when I didn't. He took her hand, his grip steady, his gaze unwavering. That's the thing about belief, he said. It doesn't stop just because time does. They stood like that for a moment, two people who had loved, lost, and grown into something better than before. Not lovers now, not boss and employee, just equals. When he finally let go, the air felt lighter. Jonathan picked up his briefcase and smiled. I'll wait for your call. You will, she said. He turned toward the door, then paused. Portland suits you. Emily. Don't let anyone convince you to trade this view for another glass tower. I won't, she said. The door closed softly behind him. Emily stood for a while, staring at the folder on her desk. The sun caught the edge of its cover, turning the embossed letters gold. She exhaled slowly. Not sadness, not nostalgia, but peace. Then she looked out the window, watching the light ripple across the water, and whispered with a small, knowing smile he never stopped believing. And neither, she realized, had she. The harbor woke slowly that morning, bathed in gold. A thin mist floated above the water, curling around the masts of docked boats. The air smelled of salt and coffee, gulls cried overhead, and the first sunlight touched the rooftops like a promise. Emily walked along the wooden pier, her coat buttoned against the spring chill. Her pace was unhurried, her breath steady the rhythm of someone no longer running from her past. The city behind her hummed quietly, not the roar of Boston's ambition, but the softer pulse of Portland's slower, kinder. She stopped by her favorite bench overlooking the water, the same spot where, months ago, she'd sat and whispered to the sea, I'm beginning. And now, she was, Carter & Co., was thriving. The partnership with the Hale Foundation had launched 3 months earlier, bringing small businesses across New England into her orbit. She'd built a network of women who reminded her of herself, resourceful, determined, learning to build their own futures, one small victory at a time. It was more than work now. It was purpose. She closed her eyes and listened to the sound of the waves brushing against the pilings. Then she heard footsteps steady, familiar. When she turned, Jonathan was there. He carried 2 cups of coffee, steam rising in the cool air. His hair was tousled by the breeze, his coat open, his expression easy, the quiet confidence of a man who'd finally stopped performing for the world. Still prefer early mornings. I see, he said, offering her one of the cups. She smiled. Old habits die hard. Some shouldn't, he said. They sat side by side, facing the water. For a while, they didn't speak. The silence between them had changed, no longer tense or heavy. It was comfortable now, like a well-worn sweater. Jonathan took a slow sip of coffee, his gaze on the horizon. You know, he said, this place suits you. It always did. She smiled faintly. You've said that before. It's still true. The wind tugged at her hair, and she tucked it behind her ear. You could stay, you know. Maine isn't bad once you stop trying to compare it to Boston. He laughed softly. I've been thinking about that. Really? He nodded. The foundation's expanding. There's talk of opening a regional office here. Maybe I'll take the assignment. Maybe it's time to stop chasing skyscrapers. She turned toward him, studying the way the morning light softened his face. There was peace there now, something she'd never seen in him before. I think, she said slowly, you've already stopped. Jonathan met her gaze, his eyes full of something warm and unguarded. Maybe I just needed a reason. Emily looked away, smiling at the water. Or maybe you needed to lose everything that wasn't real first. He chuckled. You've always had a way of turning my lessons into yours. She raised her cup in a mock toast. Occupational hazard. I work in stories. A small fishing boat drifted past, its engine humming softly. The captain waved as it passed. Emily waved back. Jonathan leaned back against the bench. It's strange, he said. 6 months ago, I thought success was measured in numbers. Now I think it's measured in peace. That's because you finally found some, she said. He nodded. And you? She smiled. I found mine too. Turns out peace looks a lot like purpose. He glanced at her, then looked back at the sea. Do you ever think about it? The night at the Fairmont, yes. All the time, she admitted, not with regret, just gratitude. It forced me to see who I was. Who were you? Then he asked gently. Someone who thought she had to earn her worth by being perfect, she said. Now I know better. He smiled faintly. And who am I now? She tilted her head, considering. Someone who finally understands that love doesn't mean control. It means letting people choose you freely. Jonathan nodded slowly. That's a lesson I learned the hard way. That's the only way any of us learn it. They fell silent again, watching the morning unfold. The sun climbed higher, scattering light across the rippling surface of the harbor. The boats glimmered. The wind softened. Jonathan turned to her, his voice quiet. Would you change anything Emily thought about that for a moment, about the champagne spill, the whispered meetings, the headlines, the heartbreak, the choices that had led her here? She shook her head. No, she said softly. Every mistake, every moment, it all brought me here. He nodded, his eyes steady on hers. Only if it meant losing you. She smiled a real, unguarded smile. You didn't lose me, Jonathan. We just found ourselves in different directions. He looked out at the horizon. Different directions can still lead to the same sunrise. She followed his gaze the line where the sea met the sky, glowing brighter by the minute. And for a long time, they just sat there, not lovers anymore, not colleagues, but something deeper, two souls who had walked through fire and come out whole on the other side. When the sun cleared the horizon completely, Emily stood and stretched. I should get to the office, she said, smiling. Some of us have deadlines. He laughed softly. And some of us are retired. She raised an eyebrow. Retired or reinventing. He grinned. Maybe both. She turned to go, but he caught her hand just for a moment. The touch was gentle, familiar, not claiming, not pleading. Emily, he said quietly. She looked back. I'm proud of who you've become. She smiled. You should be. You had good taste in people. He laughed, shaking his head. Still impossible to win with you. Always, she said, releasing his hand. She walked away. Her steps light on the pier, the morning sun warming her back. Jonathan watched her go, the wind stirring his coat, his expression full of quiet contentment. He turned his gaze toward the water, where the reflection of the sunrise shimmered like gold. Some nights would always haunt them, the ones where they'd made choices that hurt, where love had blurred into fear, where silence had said what words couldn't. But this morning wasn't one of them. This morning belonged to beginnings. In the quiet spaces of our lives, we all learn what Emily and Jonathan learned the hard way, that love and power rarely live peacefully under the same roof. Sometimes the truest act of love is not holding on, but letting go with grace. This story reminds us that dignity is not found in what we own or who we impress, but in how we choose to stand when the world misunderstands us. Forgiveness, whether given or received, is never weakness. It is the quiet strength that frees the soul. For those of us who have carried regret or loved in ways the world couldn't understand, Emily's journey speaks softly. It's never too late to begin again, to build something of your own, to find peace in simplicity and meaning in honesty. Because in the end, success fades, beauty fades, but integrity endures. And sometimes, the bravest hearts are the ones that finally learn to walk away, not in bitterness, but in peace. Thank you for spending your time with Shining Stories tonight. If Emily and Jonathan's journey touched your heart, if it reminded you that love, forgiveness, and second chances still matter, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt stories to life, stories that remind us all that even through loss, hope still shines. Until next time, take care of your heart and keep shining.